So I'm Rosie Campbell. I'm a professor of politics at Birkbeck, which is part of the University of London, and it's a university where people, students, majority of whom work during the day and come and do their degree or their postgraduate degree in the evening. I have been interested in politics unusually probably since I was a child. I used to enjoy watching the news and debating with my dad and deliberately taking the opposite position from him, and I still do enjoy, and I like the fact that sometimes I win now. I've had a long-standing interest in politics. I used to think that I wanted to be a politician, and I realised I just didn't think I could do the compromise that would be involved. I knew what I believed, and I'd find it very hard to, if you're part of a party, you've got to agree on a party position and commit to it. And so that's a cop-out, really. So I'm observing from the outside and fascinated, but not getting my hands dirty. Well, it's a massive difference, and I think really doing politics is the more important job. Politics is about how resources are distributed in society. They're about who gets what and when, and that is fundamental to almost everything. But in a democracy, I also think you really need people who are paying close attention to what's going on. And so that's also a very important role, to be informed, to study, to be an active citizen, to scrutinise and to make sure that our politicians are doing the best job that they can be. I think that's also a really, really important role. So that is the difference. I see myself as providing evidence that can be used in debate and trying. I really take neutrality and objectivity in my job very seriously. I really do believe, although I have my personal views, oddly, having not wanted to compromise in my day-to-day life, I have to look at things as objectively as I can. And sometimes I find myself writing things that I wish were not true, but are true. So oddly, I've had to compromise anyway, so maybe I should have got my hands dirty. Well, I mean, there are two reasons, I suppose. One of them is self-interested and one of them's more altruistic. Study politics because politics affects everything that goes on in your life and affects everyone around you. And to study that, it's touching upon, your housing, the schooling of your children you may or may not have in the future, the education you're experiencing now, how much tax you're going to pay when you go to work, what kind of services you're going to get in return. Really, everything in your life is affected by politics, so to study it is fundamental, but also it's enormously interesting. It's incredibly good fun, especially at this time when there is so much going on, and we see whatever your position, the election of Donald Trump in the US is absolutely fascinating. How can you not want to observe this for the next 3 years? Everything has changed. For a very long time when we taught British politics, you didn't have to change your lecture notes that much from year to year. Textbooks could have a little bit of a minor edit, and then there's been incremental, gradual changes that suddenly have changed, flipped overnight. So if we talk about the Westminster system of politics, very centralised. We have this historically two-party system, because our first past the post electoral system is supposed to generate two parties. And gradually we saw other parties emerging, the SNP in Scotland, the Liberal Democrats started to do better, then UKIP did very, very well. In 2015 we saw a massive change where there was a landslide for the SNP in Scotland, which meant that they went from having, off the top of my head, 6 to 56 MPs overnight. I think I'm getting that right, which really signalled that maybe a two-party system wasn't the right, or even a 2.5-party system with the Liberal Democrats wasn't the right way to describe British politics. And then, of course, we got UKIP in 2015. They didn't they didn't secure seats, but what they did do was they managed to come second in a lot of places and get a very high proportion of the vote share. And so when we were making that programme in the aftermath of the 2015 election, we were saying rip up the old politics textbooks. We've sort of for a long time focused too much on a kind of national story, ignoring Northern Ireland and putting it in a box. And actually now we need to think much more about the different parts of the UK, and we need to think about challenges to the two big parties. And then of course we get 2017. And in between, we have the European referendum, And then we get 2017, and actually we see the two main parties getting 80% of the vote, which they haven't had since the 1970s. How do we explain that? Is it return to business as usual? Is it something different? There's an awful lot going on. Well, that's a good point. John Curtis, now Sir John Curtis, I believe, the very famous political scientist who got the election right with his exit poll last time compared to everybody else. His data tends to be right. He said to me after 2015, "You've got to stop teaching British politics. British politics is over," which I think is the point, that actually what once was a uniform national swing, you could really talk about the two main parties operating in almost every constituency in mainland Britain, has changed massively. And in some ways we still keep moving in the mould as if Westminster's the centre, and yet of course it isn't. And lots of politicians make their careers elsewhere, and the people's concerns and the way they're addressed are sometimes, focused, for example, in Scotland, in the Scottish Parliament. So can you really talk about British politics anymore? Well, I think even given devolution, we still have a very centrist system. We don't have a formal constitution, so formally the power, and even after devolution, Parliament could take powers away from the other institutions. So obviously we've moved away from British politics, but I think fundamentally a lot of the core assumptions still remain underlying, at least the constitution.